Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Cepin and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Andy Littleton. I am pro-bivocationalism, and I'm sitting here with anti-bivocational Cepin, Eric Cepin from the Village, and we are about to have an absolutely earth-shattering sparring match about the grave evils or the profound holiness of bivocationalism.
Yeah.
And of course, as
people are just on the edge of their seats.
They're on the edge of their seats. Who will win? Who will prove righteous and enter the kingdom of God?
Oh, yeah. Not to spoil it, but it turns out that you're for a particular kind of bivocationalism, and I'm against a particular kind of it. So
yeah. Okay. So there's nuance. Man, that's
turns out we're highly nuanced.
They're not going to listen now. They wanted to hear a fight, man. Well, hey.
Yeah, I don't think fight.
It's a good conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy.
All right.
Well, okay. So last time we were touching on bivocationalism.
Yes.
And
we said some stuff. I said some incinerary things.
Yeah, that kind of typical Eric Cepin. I'm anti. Oh wow, okay. And I was thinking about it. I went, hasn't Rod been bivocational the whole way and all this stuff? So yeah, let's talk about being bivocational. I've somewhat embraced that life, even to the degree I've written a book helping people discern if it's a good path for them. And then you've said recently you're against it. So let's duel. The duel.
Well, Rod wasn't bivocational for 8 of the years at the Village.
Yeah.
I mean, once we both came on full time. I think he came on full time a year after I did.
Yeah.
He then got a job with the CRC.
Right.
So we decided to make that shift.
Yeah. Anyway, so,
But yes, he had some bivocational stuff going on.
Yeah. Anywho, and he couldn't have probably functioned. I mean, I don't know. Would they have had hard to say. His wife's a nurse. So is mine.
Right.
Look at that. So, okay, let's jump into
Let's jump in. What
are you? Oh, okay, go ahead.
What is bivocational pastoring? What exactly is it? Since you wrote the book on it.
Sure, the book on it. So my buddy Sean from Portland, Sean Benish, and I co-wrote something called Part-Time Pastoring, and that title is. People don't love it because if you get into kind of Christian circles, it's bivocational, and even that's not quite the best term. So co-vocational is one of the favorites.
Co-vocational.
And the reason that is a good term, the wording of it, is that it's ideal if your vocations have overlap. They work together.
Sure.
They're integrated. So co-vocational versus like I have another job. And part-time feels even worse because it's like, I'm only a pastor part of the time. Now, from a strictly technical point of view, it is accurate. You'd have a part-time job, vocation as a pastor, and you would work part-time doing something else.
Right.
Anyway, the reason that we chose that title is because a lot of times when people are on the very front edge of thinking this through, usually it's people who are beginning.
I like how you said front edge instead of cutting edge. That's nice.
Yeah, I don't want to cut people. Let's just be at the front.
Be at the front.
If you're on the front edge of making a decision, or of planting or something like that, and you look and you go, man, I can't support my family doing this. This is, you might think, do I need a part-time job?
Yes.
And that's why I titled it this way. Or it tends to happen very commonly on the back end of a pastoral career, or when a church is smaller, you look and you go, well, I'd like to pastor this church, but it can't afford to sustain my life. Maybe I have to retire. I'm not going to have the resources I need. So pastors tend to think about being part-time. Some, I think think about it as a whole ministry strategy for various reasons. But we named it part-time pastoring for the people who didn't have all the terms down, who weren't already in the chat groups about these things, who were just hunting and Googling part-time, being a part-time pastor.
Right.
So my hope was that we would catch some of those folks with the title. Anyway, I wrote that book with my friend Sean Benesh. Yeah.
Cool.
There you go. So, did that define it?
Yeah.
Is there any more you need?
No,
okay.
I don't need any more.
I would briefly say that the book is really exploratory. It's kind of, in a way, it's saying, actually, Rod writes the foreword, and he immediately says, technically, I don't think pastors should have to be bivocational,
right.
which is great. Right out of the gate, and we kept that. We were like, yeah, okay. Well, that's really what he's thinking. But he also talked about how he really appreciated guys like us who are willing to do what we did. We get into some of the benefits of it. I think that we spend a good amount of time saying, if you're going to do it, it should be very strategic, not
right.
just like go get a job. It'd be think about how this could embed you in your community more. Think
right.
about how this could, even if it were something that gave you a reprieve, like think about who you are, the way you're wired, and think through how you should spend your time as you work. And if it's strategic, it could be good.
Right.
It could be not strategic and not good. And then we talk through how there are different types of people. Maybe some people are wired to where it's actually a real gift, and others it's not. And you need to think that through. And it doesn't necessarily solve all the problems. It
right.
can be really
right.
difficult. So we try to kind of, my hope was that people would pick it up, be able to go through a discernment process with our help, and
be thoughtful about it.
Yeah,
sure.
There you go.
Yeah. So now we can get into the boring pastor talk.
Yeah.
About why I'm against bivocational.
Oh, this is the spicy part. This is why.
Right,
this is why everybody just skipped
listening.
over that part.
So
They're
here
like,
Eric's
"This
thoughts.
feels like an ad." Now Eric's going to
tell you why
why he's against me.
Well, it's actually not against you. I think it's usually what I am against is a whole underlying value system that has come out of the church planting and missional church movement.
Let's go.
And that is that we started throwing these stats out a long time ago, and the stats were that in a established church, it takes 100 people to see one person come to Christ. In a church plant, it takes 3 people to see someone come to Christ.
Never heard these stats.
Now, these are the stats that so in the church planting movement, what we were looking is plant churches. You need funding for churches.
Sure.
And so you kind of ended up going 2 routes. One is you can find a denomination or find a group of outside people who will fund you for 3-4 years to go plant a church, right, as a pastor. And
by plant a church in these cases, there's often a sense that this means a fully functioning organization, often with a large meeting space and what feels like staff.
Or you're meeting at the school, or
a meeting space.
Salary. Yeah, it can have flashy lights or not. But
agreed.
But what happens is that means that if their funding isn't there, then we start saying, well, this bivocational thing, and the way we justify it is that we say, well, it's going to help you be a missionary in your community. You're going to everything you just talked about.
Yeah.
So there's the argument for it. But my thing is, it takes 10 people to pay one pastor if they're willing to give 10%.
Right?
Because then they can give the collective, they can give a collective salary, the average of the salary. And what that does is it says the person who is going to give us spiritual oversight, who's going to shepherd us, who's going to train us, who's going to do all these things, like, we're willing to take care of them. So this is not a exchange. Like, this is not like we're getting, or consumerism. He's giving us some goods, and we're trying to get the best deal we can. Instead we're saying, no, we're going to take care of him because we want this person to lead us into the church planting movement, into the thing like that. And so I think that should be actually the focus first. And the reason I think this is just because,
and that assumes really quick that the people you've got on board are all mature believers to some degree to where they're
right. If
giving
you're gonna,
at that level.
well, but I would argue if you're going to plant a church,
you do need a core.
You need a core of people.
Yeah, I agree.
Because you don't want the burden all to be placed again on you. And
right.
And I think what happens is that we began to, what I would say, try to type people. So we try to find the charismatic guy who can gather people and bring people in.
This gets at our conversation last week a little bit about Hirsch's categories.
Right. So we try to get that's the person. And then we call them church planters. And I don't actually think that's necessarily the only way to plant a church.
It's not. Yeah.
Nor it may be the most effective way to plant a church. Because as someone who's planted a church in Tucson, I can count probably 10 to 15 churches that closed. Yeah. And they all kind of went with the mode of the more charismatic person.
Well, if the charismatic person is it, and then it lives or dies on that person.
Right.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. So for a while, I was in this group called Area 251.
Oh,
Area
cool.
251.
Was that over
Area
in
215? Yeah, it was Area 215. Anyway, it was
over in Roswell.
It was at the Muse, and we all met in room 215. And it was led by a guy from the emerging movement. He was a megachurch pastor in Pittsburgh, and he'd written a number of books. Anyway, he's an interesting guy, and hanging out with him and thinking through things. But one thing he said to me that I thought it was probably the only thing I've ever held on to from him was, if your church is unwilling to take care of you, they're not going to do a good job of taking care of the people who don't know Jesus. Because they're not there to take care of people. They're there to get something.
Yeah.
And so...
And some of that is a process, but yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
But my thing... So I guess why I have a hard time with the bivocational thing is I'm just like, well, if you've got more than 20 people who are moderately strong Christians in your church, you should be able to support one staff person full time.
Yep. So here's really quick to that, because I don't disagree with that. I'll give a little bit of maybe my this comes a bit from my experience, but I think it probably is true of others. So I grew up, or at least a portion of my growing up here in Tucson was at a smaller church.
Yeah. And
it had what is a very typical model, at least it was back then, and maybe still is now to some degree, where they had one full-time pastor on staff, and his wife helped pretty much for free.
Right.
And so she did stuff with kids. She was the piano accompanist. She logged all the attendance and did all this stuff. He did all of his. I mean, he was preaching. He kept the grass. He did all the maintenance. It was kind of this, and the church did support that one staff member that got doubled because his wife was all in for that. At least she was willing to participate, whether or not maybe she loved it. I don't know. But then when he retired, that his follow-up didn't exist. And that church had to piece together, because they had a guy who was there, who was a good musician, but not a preacher, and actually happened to be a landscaper, thank goodness, and could take care of the grass and do that kind of stuff. So you had a musician grass guy, and then you had a couple people a retired pastor who could fill in preaching. And I actually got my first ministry job because they were looking and they had holes. And I was 18 and declared I wanted to be in ministry. And they said, okay, we need a bongo player to play alongside this musician. So there's a little percussion. We need some help on the grounds because it's a lot for him to do by himself. We haven't found anybody who's willing to do hospital visits. And then like logging the attendance and doing the announcements and making sure the bulletin's done.
Sure.
So I got that job, which was a hodgepodge and
Yeah.
wild. And then I brought some things that I started interacting with neighborhood kids, and that was kind of a new thing. So here's the point. Today, in my church context, I think I would die. No. Okay, that's really dramatic.
You said that last time, and I'm like, no, he's not.
It would be a very unpleasant existence for me to do all the roles at our church. For me, I am not. So I'm not administrative. There are a lot of things. So in our church, it feels like we have several of us on staff. So we have a great administrator. I'm able to do mostly a focus on teaching and kind of trying to lead us into new things. John is the much more pastoral presence of us. He loves to just be with people and like long form, more like maybe your personality. We've got Mike, he's a great elder. He is also a musician, but he tends to think about how we ought to be as a church. There's a lot of good organizational leadership actually within him. We've got a couple of interns. And Cruz is much more evangelistic. Jared is very good about kind of, I would say, especially our need for prayer and these types of things. And I'm so grateful that that whole group is leading together, and for them to get some form of compensation for their time. Our church is not able to support all of those as like full salaries, at least not our church as it is. And I think, to me, part of bivocationalism isn't just should the church be able to support one person, but is it best for one person or one or two people to fill all these roles, or is it better to have a diversity of leaders that don't work for the church full time in this case? I personally think in our case, my case, it's better to have the diversity of leaders. And you have a diversity of leaders.
We do.
Yeah. And they aren't paid what maybe would be full-time in the marketplace.
They're probably paid full-time what you would get here in Tucson.
Yeah, as like a school administrator or something like that. That's kind of the parallel to church leadership.
I've looked at the average salary in Tucson for a lead pastor. In the median, we're close to it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's not actually that high in Tucson.
No. I mean, what I've heard, and I think this is accurate, is what technically should be is the school in your district, an administrator in that school is the most parallel type of job if you were looking at what pay ought to be. There's a lot of pastors. There's a lot of bivocational Latino pastors. There's people who do it for very little.
Right. No, I totally agree. I mean, and the average salary of a full-time pastor is about $45 in Tucson.
Yeah. That's hard to live on with the price of housing these days. And
I don't disagree with you, but it's about what a school teacher makes.
Yeah.
Who manages about the size of a small church. They usually have about 120 students.
Yeah.
Here's first, if I got 10 people
and
you live at 10% of their salary, then you live at the level of your people, which
I also agree is good.
But here's my argument. And since we're debating this, let's just think about it for a second. I think that you could work as the single paid pastor at your church, being paid what you are worth, leading in your gifts, and running a large volunteer level group of people who buy in and are willing to put their money and time and energy behind it. Meaning, yes, you like to see those people be compensated, but when they're not, more and more people take possession of the community. And I think, and they take ownership of it. And that's what you want, because then they'll put their money and time into it because it's theirs. And certainly, I mean, I've been in lots of churches where, there's the compensation, the standard, and, somewhere between $250 and $750 a month, the compensation, depending on what you do kind of thing. It's a small church, kind of thing to do. But I don't know. So for me, again, and if you're, and I'm not saying that even like the village has done this well, but I still think like you could pay full-time pastors if you've got 70 people, and you
Right.
or 35 giving units, say, or 40 giving units. Well, that should be 2 pastors in a building,
Sure.
right? I mean, you should be able to do that.
Right.
We're not able to, but I guess my argument is just it comes back to like, are we taking advantage? Are you being taken advantage of?
And
Are your other people working? Are people being taken advantage of?
sure. Yeah, great question. It depends on the makeup of the church, right? Like I was saying, I feel a sense, and I think I see this in the village as well, that I don't want to only work with or have a sense of belonging among mature believers who are all ready to give to that degree. I'd like to see people moving in that direction. But when a lot of your time is going to people who don't give yet, that's something to be factored in. The other thing is I don't know that I could lead that type of organization. You're talking about like mobilizing all those volunteers, and I don't know that my
All right, so you
strengths are in like I legitimately think I have a role in that,
sure,
but I don't think I could lead that whole organization by myself that would do that effectively, even in your definition.
So well, let's talk about Eugene Peterson. I mean, you can use the Eugene Peterson model, which was, I mean, he just had 5 women who were all wives of people in the church who weren't getting paid, who came in every once a week and organized the church for him.
Right.
They just 4 women, 5 women. They took it on themselves to manage the church.
Right.
I said that's what I mean in the sense of ownership. There are
Yeah.
people saying like, well, okay, well, Andy, we appreciate what Andy does so much that we'll do this in order for this to work.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that sense of ownership. I'm just saying I don't know that has to always mean that there is one key fully paid pastor or not. I think it could be, you could have a couple of bivocational leaders and
could.
have the same thing.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's ideal.
Yeah. What's the concern? Okay, outside of like the church should be able to do it, what's the least ideal piece of it?
Well, I think that unless your job is so integrated, the two are so integrated, that you will find yourself being stretched thin.
Sure.
And emotionally exhausted. And I mean, the classic one, if I like work at Starbucks or,
Right.
A lot of pastors, church planting pastors,
Sure.
that's the place to be. Poor Starbucks workers have been over evangelized. I think that what that does is like if you're planting a church or if you're really doing true pastoral work, you're going to need breaks, and you're going to need, standing on your feet, going from engaging people deeply and then going and standing on your feet, for 8 hours straight. It can, over a long period of time, can be stressful. Or managing a business, like you're going to end up having these two places where that are in conflict. Now you might have some evangelistic engagement there. I'm not saying that's not going to put you in the world and connect you. And
I wonder how much, like, for you and I are different, makeups and
sure.
are factoring into how we think about these things. Because for me, the exhausting idea is actually to do church work all week.
Well, what do you think church work is?
Well, the being with people.
But that's what pastors do. You're with people.
Yeah. So
I mean, I think,
but how much of the week, right? Like, I'm just being serious. Like, I remember. So I just actually told my wife this story that I really related. So I was in Seattle. There was a church planter I knew, and not like the smoke and mirrors type, just doing a very simple church plant.
Sure.
And I woke up while we were staying there, kind of studying his church plant. I woke up Saturday morning to saws and stuff going on outside,
Right.
and he was outside building cabinets.
Right.
And I kind of meandered out there with some coffee, and I said, "You do this with your day off?" And he said, "If I didn't do this, I'd go crazy."
Oh, yeah.
And so he was doing the side project on a weekend, right?
Yeah.
And he said because the people stuff, there's no solving, he said, I can design a cabinet, make a cabinet, have a complete cabinet.
Oh, yeah.
And there's something for at least for me and a number of other people I've talked to, that when some of your weekly work is more like that, it actually becomes a way of having a balanced life.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
I totally don't disagree. But but we're talking about your bivocational life, not bivocational life in general.
Well, and this is kind of what we were getting at in the book, was like, if you just go, I need another job, like
to make my ends meet.
If that's the conversation, that could be a really bad move. Like if it's purely, I need a job to make ends meet, whatever I can get. I mean, I remember a guy we both knew here that had the job at Costco. You have to work on their schedule. It's hard. I don't think that was a good bivocational plan. So not that mine's always been perfect, but the more, as I've worked through it over the years, I'm asking the question of what's a reprieve for me at times, and that's changed depending on the time, but that it needs to be more purposeful. Like, what's a reprieve? What does like place me in the culture to where my finger's on the pulse? Actually, like our store for the last several years has really been that type of place for me. I seriously sit there about once a week. I work the floor of the store and I just hear people talking, and I interact with them, and I learn about why people are moving to Tucson, and it has really informed my sense of what's going on in the city.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take that many hours. And I always tell people, because I started the store myself and the church, like I kind of get to, there are certain things you have to do, but I have a lot of leeway.
Yeah.
And so I'm for like well-designed bivocationalism that allows for, and it is never going to be perfect, but I'm not just for start something when there's not enough money, go get another job and make sure you have enough money.
Right.
That to me is a very weak bivocational strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would argue that, if you're doing something like you're doing, I would hope that the future, I don't think the future of Mission Church is to have all its pastors be bivocational.
Mm. And that's what we have sort of aimed at that. And I wonder, because, so kind of like I was just saying to you, maybe you wouldn't do what I do. I don't know that I would do quite what you do, but I've also wondered with some of our other leaders, is this more my path? And maybe it's not as good of a fit for everyone.
Well, I did what you did. I mean, I worked 40 hours a week in a hospital and worked 30 hours in ministry. I mean, it's not like I haven't done it.
Yeah.
My point, and it's not that I don't have my own hobbies that help me, right? I mean, I do this. I paint.
Yeah.
Build things. Like, I don't know. So, yes, I have like things, because as pastors, when you work with people, it's the same for therapists. Anybody who works with people,
you need to do something else.
And you need to do something where you can feel like you completed something. Like you go from A to B and it's done. Because
the rest of your existence is not like that.
No, it's not. And I think when I get down to the bivocational thing and where I push back is, I'm not pushing back per se maybe against you, but I am pushing back on a movement. Because I'm not actually very pro church planting. In traditional style of church planting. I have moved away from it because I see it as a waste of money.
Well, I think a lot of the people promoting bivocationalism have the same feeling.
Yeah, no, I maybe, but I think like it's also like because we want results quickly.
Yeah.
And if somebody else is funding it, they need results. And so I don't have a problem with somebody starting a church and like, okay, so you're working, let's just say, you're not the entrepreneurial Andy, so you get the Starbucks job. Mm-hmm. Or you're working as an engineer and you're like, okay, I do have this calling to plant a church. So I'm going to start gathering some of my friends and I'm going to start talking to them about that. Okay, so I got 10 people who've caught the vision and we can do this. Yeah. Now I'm saying, hey, if we're going to do it, you guys are going to need to support me so I can step in full time and we can begin this process and I can leave my job to make this happen. That way I don't,
So that's bivocational at the planting stage once a core is built. Which
beginning the process of helping disciple that community, and maybe it does once they're all in and they've made a commitment, by their financial, when people are in financially, then they're in.
Sure. Yeah. No, and that's good. And that dovetails on what we talked about last week, where I do need to think more in those terms as far as like when people give financially, they're in, and encourage them to think about being in that way. We just had a meeting, a members meeting where I was able to work on that, muscle. So I agree with you. It's interesting because I actually fully agree in the planting world. I mean, and Sean and I have who wrote the book with me, we have a similar sense of that. He's worked with a lot of planters and he was a planter and he goes, man, we throw tons of money at these things and we give hundreds of thousands. It's supposed to be sustainable in 3 years. And to do that, you often go against your own principles because you say you're out to reach people, but because you need the money to come in, you take a lot of transfer growth and, you have to. And
right.
Because that's the only way the money's going to come in. And then you have to run this organization at this certain level. And if it doesn't become that, it's a failure, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
And you got people moving to all the quote unquote cool places, trying to be the next big thing. And, and we're throwing tons of money at this and it does not make sense. And I fully agree with that. My journey, I was, I did an internship with the church, concluded that I was supposed to plant a church, though that wasn't quite the big idea for me. And we started with friends in a backyard, and I started a handyman business. Partially at the time, I hadn't thought all this through, but I thought, well, I could go take a job somewhere. But if I start my own handyman business, I can be flexible with it, which was being strategic in a way. It's like I can say, well, I always have these days off. I decide. Yeah,
you get to decide.
Which is why I did it that way. And then eventually, as we kind of solidified ourselves, it was great because it was a small community. It was close-knit. They wanted us to get paid, so they added some pay. And then the interesting thing is when we merged is when all of a sudden, because I was the only paid person at that time, and frankly, in some ways struggled with the various parts of that, like getting communications out to people and being, the organizational side is not my strength. But when we did the merger with Epicenter, it's like, okay, here you've got somebody who's, I would say Mike comes across to everyone as the great musician, but that's just a piece of, he actually is a very organized, big picture thinker about how things could function and should function. And that was a real gift to me. And then we had, actually at that time, we had someone who wanted to do some administration, but it was fair to pay them. This is a retired lady. And
sure.
And so then you start to go, you know what, actually having these different roles.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is I agree regarding the whole what we do with church planting. That wasn't our journey, and I think it was way more sustainable, and it grew naturally to some degree. If it hadn't, it wouldn't have been this net loss to anybody, actually. Sure. Hardly at all. No organization was looking over our shoulder, going, "What are you doing with the money?" You know?
Right.
Yeah. And having another job was part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think all those are. I think it just goes back to, I remember telling this guy in area, I was in area 215. I'm like, hey, like, I'm giving him all these reasons why I shouldn't be paid that much, and why it's okay that I'm not paid this much, and I'm in church plant mode, second year of the church, and he just looked at me and he's like, no, this is your first and only priority as a church planter. It's for your community to learn how to take care of you.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all you need to do. Then you can move forward. And I don't know if I ever did that fully that well.
Yeah.
But it is.
Well, there are different definitions of that. That's another thing I bump into. Like, for you to be fully taken care of, you live with another family. You share a house.
Yeah.
Like, talk about, a radical departure from what a lot of Americans think is sustainable, right?
Right.
Like, there's, so I've talked to a number of pastors where when they say what is sustainable for them, it is they need to buy a pretty nice home in a pretty nice area just for them.
Right.
They need to be putting away a solid amount of money for retirement and college. Like, they're talking like CEO salary that they need. And so that's another piece of the conversation.
I think his definition would simply have been the more traditional one, which was you should be paid 10%. You should be paid the average of the salaries of your community.
Yeah.
That's what he said. Whatever that. So he's like, if the population you care for and love on makes $16,000 a year, then you make $16,000 a year.
Which
that's what he was arguing.
And I tend to agree with that. I do think, and this doesn't speak for or against the bivocational conversation. This is a whole nother one. But for me, when I hear a pastor, I want people to be taken care of. I want them to send their kids to college. All this, absolutely. But there is sometimes wanting to be bivocational or wanting to be a lead pastor is driven by another. It feels to me like it can be driven more by succeeding as we Americans define it versus a call to ministry.
I totally agree.
So my wife and I had to have a conversation when we planted the church, and it wasn't an easy one, and it hasn't continued to be an easy one, but we had it. And it was, are we called to ministry? Like, we don't know what's on the other side of this. We don't know what God does. We don't know what God supplies. We don't know what this church becomes. So whether we end up well taken care of or struggling, has God called us to this?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And I mean, I'm talking about all of this, and I get that we live in a world where I don't even think, forget the 10% of the income. Like, we don't live in a world where our churches can really take care of their pastors in the way they should, in the sense of, like, we're getting them health insurance.
Right.
Everything is just so expensive and
it's
very, very difficult.
Very difficult. We've looked into it and gone, oh my gosh, it's so far out of reach.
Right.
Yeah.
So things are very difficult in that context. I just think that,
and a lot of times, really quick, I think pastors lead churches they don't like
in order to
get these things.
Sure.
And I understand, because it's like you want to take care of your family, but sometimes I think they don't even lead churches they like.
And that may also be their calling, but
it might be. Hey, it might be. Yeah.
I think the other thing we have to address, and I wrestle with, is that your leaders deserve double honor. And double honor in the Bible, in the New Testament, when Paul talks about, is not about, I give you extra care.
I like you
verbally.
twice as much.
No, it's a financial statement that your elders are to be paid twice as much as everybody else is making. And the extent there is to say you need to take care of them, and it should cost you all something. I think that, and that's, I guess me growing up, I did not think that. That was never, I have been in so many churches, and it was never taught to me that this is our responsibility as a community to really honor, love, and care, and make it as easy for this person to teach us how to be evangelists and apostles and pastors ourselves. Like, we need to make it easy for them to do it, not be a hindrance, and in so many ways, in the ways we behave, the ways we treat them, the way we support them.
Yeah, the so many ways thing I think is important. Also, as I mentioned, that work and worship book I read recently, and how they talked about, we tend to think only about money. And a lot of the ways people gave and gave double honor it was in-kind giving, it was sharing of resources, and so on. And so I think our modern context is unique, and you have to factor that in, but it doesn't necessarily all mean give them twice as much money. But it does mean alleviate whatever the lack of money might be causing. My former pastor, there was somebody that owned a dealership. This is my understanding of it. I never investigated this story, but from what I understood is they always had a lease with the auto dealership for a vehicle. The guy owned an auto. It was an in-kind gift. He didn't give them the car, but they always had a car.
Right.
And every few years they just picked up a different one. And that was his way of doing that. Right. Of offering that.
Right.
So,
and in the old days, I mean, it's like you slaughter a chicken, or you do an extra one and you bring it over to the pastor's house.
This is and it seems like they did a lot. So when people had a resource, they went out of their way to say, let's make sure this factors in to the care of our spiritual leaders.
Well, right. And consumerism has changed the way we operate. I mean, so it's different.
And in some ways we should probably push against that, and in other ways you have to go, this is how it works right now.
And I always give an example. I mean, it's partly our homes. Like we should be opening our homes for people to be able to stay there and stuff like that. But I think Rod, I always use Rod as an example in this with his cars. He always says it's not Rod's car, it's God's car, and how he hits it with his new car with a hammer so that he doesn't feel like he
just bumped into somebody with the newest one. He said it was a hammer, but he just backed into somebody.
Yeah. So he got away with that one. But then he also had said from the pulpit, I got this car. It's God's car. If you need to borrow a car to go travel out of town, or your cars, I'm more than happy to loan you. And people took him up on it. Yeah. And I think that when you think about this, you think, well, can I do that with my car? Can I do that? So, yeah, I mean, I think, but we don't think about the pastor that way. Like, how am I caring for my pastor?
I was going to say, interestingly, in that illustration, it's the pastor who did end up working bivocationally for the village, who was the one letting someone use his car.
At that time, he wasn't, but yes. But the other thing is, we live in a two income world. Your wife works, my wife works, Rod's wife works, Mark's wife works, Michael's wife works here. They all work.
And so in that regard, our families are all bivocational.
No, so I don't. Yeah. It's just, I just have to go back to, I think it's the church planting mindset that I have a problem with. It's the data driven.
Yeah.
Shoot,
man, I'm with you on that.
And that kind of, I feel much more inclined if a church is planted and it gets mature and maybe it plants one other church in 100 years.
Right.
But those two churches still exist and they're healthy, then you're probably better off than 15, 20, 30. Like, we're just throwing a bunch of churches against the wall and seeing which one sticks. And spending a lot of money.
Yeah, I think we got we saw some good truths about new churches, and I mean that were probably facts, and went berserk with it. And I think it was that the entrepreneurs, kind of took over, people like me, and didn't think through the consequences of this. But I think we have, when you think about the money that the churches and denominations don't have, you imagine, what if they hadn't thrown it at so many plants that didn't work?
Yeah.
Where you'd be in a lot better shape.
Right.
But you also need to do new things and try things, and
sure.
So there's that too.
I don't have a problem. Yes, I agree. But I mean, when you start seeing the money, don't get me started. Like Christian schools, we're just dumping money everywhere all the time. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of money.
Yeah. What if you had 10 million, at a $10 million denominational account at your disposal right now, and you had to spend it in 1 week, what would you spend it on?
If I had $10 million,
yeah.
Can I just invest it?
Good.
I mean, I would invest the $10 million and use $100,000 a year to.
But what would you do with the dividends?
I'd pay 2 pastors.
Okay. Yeah.
I would go to churches that are doing really good stuff and relieve the stress of that, and let those pastors pour themselves into things.
Yeah.
And not have to worry about it.
Yeah.
And say you're good for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
We got this 10 million. So go do your thing.
Well, if you want to send some of it our way, Eric, I'll take it.
Well, if you can tell me where to get the 10 million.
Oh, well.
I probably would spend it a lot of different ways, but that's why I don't like those things, because I don't think God does that. Very rarely does God come along and be like, "Hey, I got 10 million."
Well, yeah,
do what you want with it.
Obviously, a major hypothetical question, but I'm saying, would you, since the church is wasting money, where would it be better spent? And it probably a number of things, but
yeah,
and it depends on the context.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's so many. The thing is, like, there's so many problems in the world that 10 million is just like a drop in the bucket as to what.
Yeah. I mean, shoot, man, my deepest longing would be that I didn't have to think about money at all, and I could just, spend time being with people and tell them about Jesus. And if I wanted to build a cabinet,
Yeah.
And if I wanted to,
that's the best job ever.
Yeah, that'd be the ultimate, right? Would be that.
I know what I'd do with the 10 million. I would just build a lot of houses in Malawi, because they're $3,400 to build a good house, and that is earthquake resistant.
You'll contribute to some kind of
build tons and tons of houses
poverty problem that
I'm sure
accidentally.
I accidentally create. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I know. That's how it works. It's just Anyway, well, this was an interesting podcast.
Yeah, totally. Always is, man.
Yeah, people are like, wait, why do they keep talking about giving? 2 weeks.
Well, I didn't mean to talk about giving. I was just trying to follow up on the bivocational thing. So if you want to read a book that's heretical, part-time pastoring by Andy Littleton and Sean Benesh,
and if you want to give to Faith Over Breakfast, you can do it right there on.
Hey, if all of our listeners, Eric, gave 10% to this, you and I would live like real podcasters.
We could do it professionally.
Wow.
Yeah.
Look at that. But instead we do this just out of the kindness of our hearts. And because I think we like talking to each other.
We do. If you want us to be professional podcasters, this is your opportunity.
I don't know if I want to be one. But,
yeah.
If you want Eric to be one.
I always wanted to be a radio host.
Did you?
Since I was young. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, not me. But hey, I like talking to you.
Cool.
And sharing it with people. Thanks to those who listen. Hey, if you have a question, you could, if you're thinking these topics are just getting very redundant and you'd like to see us go a different direction, great. You can do something about that. faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com. Send us a question. Our website's up, faithoverbreakfast.com. What are you going to do there? You're going to get a link to listen to the show. You can get that in your podcast app, but hey, isn't it cool to know there's a website there?
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah, there's probably going to be, someday it's going to be rich with content.
Yeah.
Someday when we're
professional podcasters.
Professional podcaster. That's right. So thanks for tuning in.
Oh my gosh. You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Cepin and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.